Alright, so there's a lot of other little tips and tricks on how to use very particular pieces of the Android navigational elements besides just tabs and action bar pieces. Rather than going into the whole myriad of all of those, which could take a whole course of 40 days in itself, I'm going to show you how you can make your own navigation by getting raw values. Any particular view you have, you can implement something called an on-touch listener. It's not a particular event like a click or a drag. It's literally somebody has touched this element. So if we look right here into our, let's go to our third fragment, you can kind of see what this looks like. It's very similar to the other particular listeners we've used. Here we have a view. In this case, it's the entire fragment's root view. We're setting an on-touch listener anonymously on the fly. And again, view, on-touch listener. And what we're going to do is we're going to override the on-touch method. This gives us two things. One, which is the view, as in, which view was touched. And the other one is this thing called motion event. Motion event is an object that has all the kind of things about what happened packed into it. And it's really as simple as then asking whether or not particular pieces of that event match particular criteria to allow us to create our own particular navigation or elements that are based on exactly where the user touched. In this case, we're just going to go over a basic example of what happens when a user puts their finger down versus up. So the motion event has actually just enumerations for action up, action down. Actually has a ton of them. Some of them are not always usable under a lot of different conditions. So try to stick with basic ones. Otherwise, you may find that fragmentation really gets you in trouble. In this case, action down is pretty much always there, as is action up. You'll see, though, that this on-touch happens to be a Boolean. Well, the reason for that is if you're going to touch a view that is underneath another view, Android needs to know who's going to actually swallow that touch and respond to it. I'm going to go ahead and run this, and you can kind of see what I'm talking about. But until then, you can see that this onAction or event.getAction is what kind of event actually happened. So up or down. There are other pieces we can get out of the event, but the action is actually what tells us what happened. So in this particular case, let's say I had an event listener that was just on this first fragment. And let's say that this first fragment tab up here was on top of that. If I clicked here, you wouldn't want this fragment here to then react to it. You'd want this little tab to swallow that touch and not have it trickle down to the bottom. Well, that's why you have return true and return false here. By returning true, you're telling Android, I am actually the person who responded to that touch. So let's actually take a look at our second fragment and get even a little bit more detailed. This is something that'll be really fun if you ever want to make something like a drawing app and you want to get just the raw X and Y coordinates, or maybe even implement your own gesture system based upon what kind of shape somebody puts in. Well, in order to do all that, you have to actually get an X and Y coordinate. Where up and down and where left and right did the user actually press? So here I'm actually looking for an action move event. And notice that not only am I saying true here, but I'm also saying true here. I want people to know that my entire on-touch listener is responsible for dealing with this particular fragment's events. So you want to make sure that your actual true or false here is set to the correct value for the type of events you want to capture or ignore. So here you're actually just saying event.getX and getY. I'm saving them as strings so we can later display them. So let's see if that works. Okay, so if you notice when I press down, I go up and down, we're seeing X and Y happen. Notice, though, that if I start to do this, and ViewPager takes over, it's not the same event system. ViewPager has actually probably swallowed this event. However, Android does a really good job of balancing these two actions, which is why if I hold down my finger and look for move, you'll notice ViewPager is no longer getting triggered. Also notice how the particular coordinates change. If I go all the way over here to y equals 0, negative 1, 2, we're now in negative numbers. That's because this is actually y equals 0, and then down here is, the maximum height. So you can actually use negative numbers or respond to negative numbers for things outside of your view. X, on the other hand, we can't get negative because we can't really touch outside of the screen. We can get really close, though, if we're careful, and actually show a 0. Let's be very careful. Oop. There we go. And you can get closer and closer to 0, but never actually quite meet it if you go to the end of the screen. So using these raw touch events, you can create Android applications that have UIs that no one has ever seen before. Just be sure to create those after the Android design guidelines are not quite what you need, instead of just trying to create those things from scratch. Remember, you don't want your users to get lost. You want them to enjoy your application.